Apple, your MacBooks are too expensive and the storage options are crap. All right, how about we lower the price on the 14-inch MacBook Pro and we double the storage. Ugh, only double the storage. What's the RAM on this one, and why isn't it space black? I guess, we can only do one thing at a time. I already literally handed it to you, so... And where's that extra USB-C port on the right side? Are you trying to pull a fast one on me? No, we were just trying to bring the XDR and ProMotion to a lower-end model for some of you guys, but I guess we could bring it back. Would you prefer the touch bar? Don't disgust me with that word. Well, if you want more RAM, you can always spec it up higher, or... You want me to pay you more money? What is wrong with you? Okay, I'll take an M3 Max, and I want it in space black. But this is outrageous. I hate it. Let's begin. I want you all to remember this video next time you say, Drew's changed. Drew used to say nice things about Apple, now he just hates on them. Because I've heard that a lot this year, and in today's video, I'm going to be doing a bit more defense rants. Because yes, there's definitely a lot of new MacBook tiers that Apple dropped on us this week, and now we've had some time to digest, kind of look at the numbers, and we've already had a couple of Geekbench results leak and performance results people are talking about. So I think the best MacBook Pros to consider buying are not actually quite so obvious. Most of the tech community is probably all reacting with, oh my god, the base model 14-inch has 8 gigs of RAM, that's so outrageous, that's so ridiculous, and you can spec it up to 16 gigs, but then it's $1,800, you're only $200 away from being able to afford an M3 Pro. Well, in my opinion, the M3 Pro is the sheep in wolf's clothing. Sheep with the... Yeah, that's actually accurate. So it's great if you just want an affordable space black MacBook, but what's interesting is in Apple's own comparisons on the website. When talking about the M3 chip, they compared it to the M2. They said how much faster the CPU would be. And even when comparing the M3 Max to the M2 Max, they talk about how much faster the CPU is, but the M3 Pro is kind of the weird one because they have now rearranged the number of high-performance cores versus efficiency cores. In my opinion, I don't think M3 Pro is actually going to be that massive of a difference over M2 Pro because the high performance core count went down and the efficiency core count went up. Now, I still think in certain tests, sure, like anything that requires mesh grading or ray tracing, and of course, if you want that dynamic caching, there's probably still some advantages M3 Pro has over M2 Pro, but it says something that Apple's own marketing refused to compare the M3 Pro to the M2 Pro, whereas they did compare last generation chips with the other silicon. This makes me think that if you're fed up and sick with the concept of buying a MacBook Pro with 8 gigs of RAM and that's just not going to work for you, and you definitely want that extra USB-C port and you want to plug into more than one external monitor, then finding a used or refurbished M2 Pro is still probably going to cost you around $1,600. You still get the 512 gigs, you still get mini LED and 120 hertz, all that beautiful stuff about the MacBook Pro for much less money. And I don't think there's really going to be much of a performance hit unless you need something very, very specific that only the M3 family of chips offers, like the ray tracing, the dynamic caching, or the mesh grading. Probably most of you don't, but I also want to take it a step further and suggest that, you know what? I know a lot of people, including myself, that are still rocking with the M1 series of chips. You know it's bad when even Marquez did not upgrade to the M2 Pro. He's still rocking his M1 Max like I am and perfectly happy with it. Marquez, the guy who loves to buy all the latest and greatest, was still like, yeah, you know what, M2, probably not that big a deal. So you can find even cheaper MacBook Pro 14 inches with M1 Pro chips that are still honestly gonna be crazy fast, much faster than any Intel Mac you may be rocking today, and I've seen some of them go as low as $1,400, possibly less, and I'm sure those prices will probably start coming down even more now that the M3 Pro is out on the market, and that's where I honestly think most of the value is. If you're looking for a MacBook Pro because you want that better screen or you want that faster performance, you want an HDMI port or an SD card slot on your MacBook, then yeah, those deals, even though it's a 2-year-old MacBook, it does not feel like one, and I have no intentions on upgrading my MacBook Pro, just for the record. It's still holding up great. I'm very happy with it. That's kind of my little 2-year review. But I know not everybody is interested in buying secondhand or refurbished. Some people just have to buy new, and I understand simultaneously that Apple also has to have some kind of new new option, right? Apple can't just not release any new computers as they find more microchip manufacturing processes. They have to come out with new things and say, okay, here's the new stuff, here's how we made it better, and we hope you like it. Apple can't just go out on stage and say, I guess all of you should buy refurbished models because we can't make anything better. They have to come out with something new, and in my opinion, the entry model 14-inch MacBook Pro, even with its 8 gigs of RAM and everything, is still an absolute deal considering the display and the ports, which you do not get with a cheaper MacBook Air. You know, I've seen a lot of people arguing about this online, all saying that, oh my god, if it's 8 gigs of RAM at that point, that's ridiculous for a Pro laptop that's $1,600. At that point, you should just get a MacBook Air. But the truth is, there's a lot of objective differences now between the Air and the Pro, which was not the case back with the 13-inch MacBook Pro that we had just a week ago. Sure, it had a touch bar, and that was pretty much the only reason you should go with that MacBook, is if you really wanted a touch bar, but everything else was shared with the MacBook Airs. The same chip on the inside as the Air, same number of ports, honestly worse once the M2 MacBook Air came out. The M2 Air actually gained MagSafe and the Pro did not, and the Air got a better display upgrade, and honestly, with that entry-level silicon, having a fan was not going to make that big of an impact on your overall performance in your day-to-day life. There was so many spec similarities between the two that, yeah, I would have agreed, just go with a MacBook Air. But now, if you spend a little bit extra money to get a $1,600 14-inch MacBook Pro, you're getting the extreme dynamic range of mini LED, you're getting ProMotion, you're getting those studio-grade microphones, which, by the way, are amazing. I use those on all my live streams and podcasts, and you're gaining a lot of functional ports back. Even though it doesn't have 3 Thunderbolt ports like the higher-end MacBooks do, you still get an SD card slot in an HDMI port, which kind of comes up a lot if you're a videographer, photographer, or if you go to school and need to do presentations. You know, being able to just easily plug into any TV without the need of a dongle, I understand that appeal. And you're getting twice the storage. That's a 512 gigs by default. And yeah, it's not like a flawless MacBook. Of course, 8 gigs of RAM is a little low for 2023, but I still think there's a ton of people out there that might want to spend a bit more on their MacBook just for better display, better ports. And on top of that, where I think a lot of people are missing the point on that entry-level MacBook, battery life. That's kind of the main reason a lot of people buy laptops, you know, is because they want to use it on the go. They don't want to be stuck to their desk all the time. So how long that laptop lasts is kind of an important feature for a lot of people. And that entry-level MacBook at $1,600 now matches the insanely great battery life of the 16-inch MacBook Pro. That was one of the motivations for me opting for the 16-inch 2 years ago, was because I wanted to have great battery life. I'm traveling a lot. Sometimes I'm editing on the go away from a charger, and having 21 or 22 hours of battery life is just unheard of for any kind of high performance laptop. You're definitely not going to see that in the Windows space. And before, that used to be like, oh, you want a MacBook to last that long? Well, you're going to have to drop $2,500 to get one. Now, the fact that you can get that on a smaller MacBook Pro, which is more portable, and a more affordable one for $1,600, again, if you insist on going new, that gives it an inherent advantage over the more expensive M3 Pro MacBook, which in my opinion is probably not going to perform all that differently from an M2 Pro, which also is probably not going to perform that differently from an M1 Pro. So in my opinion, of the new M3 family of chips, the M3 Pro is kind of the weakest one. The M3, you know, this is the first time it's making its appearance in the 14-inch form factor, but it's at a $400 lower starting price. You get a big battery improvement, and the downside is, yeah, the default RAM is kind of low, but even if you spec it up to 16 gigs of RAM, it's still cheaper than the 14-inch was before. And probably the biggest other downside that you should be aware of is that entry-level model is missing an extra Thunderbolt controller because it's not a Pro-level chip on the inside, which does mean that it can only really output to like one high-resolution monitor at a time, whereas the higher-end MacBook Pros can dock up to like 2, 3, 4 monitors. But if you're just on a budget, I could totally see a lot of people making that entry-level MacBook Pro work. I think people who want some extra ports, some longer battery life, and a way better display, and they don't care so much about unified memory because they're not doing a ton of multitasking on the MacBook, that's a much bigger market, in my opinion, than, oh, well, some people just want a touch bar. We need to have an entire MacBook just for people who want a touch bar. Don't get me wrong, I love the touch bar, but that was pretty niche, and I don't think anyone's really that sad that it's gone. Not that many people were buying it in the first place, so to me, the entry-level model is kind of a bit more interesting than the M3 Pro variant, even if that's the cheapest one that has space black. Where you're going to see much more noticeable performance gains is the M3 Max. That's where they just kind of upped the high performance cores and the efficiency cores, and I don't think there was much of a compromise there. The early test results results are showcasing that the M3 Max is about on par with the M2 Ultra, which is hilarious because the M2 Ultra is not even that old of a chip. It just came out a few months ago, and there's a new Mac Pro with M2 Ultra now that's like $7,000-8,000, and that's already been beaten by like a $2,500 MacBook Pro, which also has a battery, a display, and all of that, and an SD card slot, which the Mac Pro does not have. It's crazy. The Mac Pro has basically like sucked for the past decade. The trash can Mac Pro, everyone hated. The cheese grater Mac Pro, way too expensive, and then immediately outdated when Apple Silicon came out the following year. And then they came out with an Apple Silicon Mac Pro, and that one was dated after just a couple of months. So I guess the lesson is just don't buy the Mac Pro. It's just never been worth it. But I know a lot of you are probably already commenting and mad at me for justifying the existence of a cheaper MacBook Pro that has some weak RAM, but 512 gigs of storage, and I'm sure the M3 chip is plenty fast for a lot of people out there. But I want to actually put this MacBook to the test. I don't want to just say that 8 gigs of RAM is enough for some people. I actually want to try to live with it. Even though I've reviewed an M1 MacBook Air in the past, and my friend Mike has edited many of this year's podcasts on an 8 gigabyte of RAM M1 MacBook Air. So I've actually got a 14-inch MacBook Pro, the cheapest one you can buy right now in my Apple cart, and I'm about to hit buy with Apple Pay. I'm gonna test this thing out. I want to show you guys how much productivity, how much work you can actually get done. So there you have it, Apple Pay and all. The 14-inch MacBook Pro with 8 gigs of unified memory is going to be put through the Tailosive Tech test of productivity. Can you get a lot of work done? How many issues am I going to run into? Because a lot of people out there are convinced that there's just no way that anybody out there could justify 8 gigs of RAM. I'm not saying that everybody should live with 8 gigs of RAM. I'm just saying there's a market for it. I mean, someone like me, I could not live with 512 gigs of storage, like with all of the B-roll and all of the footage I'm editing. I definitely need way more than 512, but I'm not assuming that just because I need more than 512, Apple should have, 5 terabytes by default. That's not what I'm suggesting. I'm just understanding that my line of work requires me to spec up a little bit higher. And for some of you guys who definitely need more than 8 gigs, you'll spec up to whatever you need. So I'm hoping that by checking out this MacBook Pro and kind of putting it through a long-term test of video editing, podcasting, and live streaming, I can kind of show to you guys, all right, how fast is the M3 chip? Is it faster at exporting videos than my M1 Max? And how much work can I get done with only 8 gigs of unified memory? So we'll have to wait a little bit longer for me to test it out because I'm not on Tim Cook's nice list, but I am very excited to check it out. Although I'm bummed it doesn't come in space black, I still prefer the silver color anyway. So what else do you guys want me to check out on the cheapest entry-level MacBook Pro? And are any of you out there like rich enough to just drop all your money on the M3 Max? That's definitely like the fastest silicon Apple's ever made, so that's going to be amazing, but I won't be surprised if it beats my MacBook Pro. That's not going to be an interesting comparison, so I'm more interested in the cheapest one. How does that compare to my 2-year-old MacBook Pro? And watch out for that M3 Pro, because it probably doesn't have as many advantages over an M2 Pro than you might think, and the M1 Pro is still an incredible value, so consider used. Thank you to everybody supporting this channel directly. It seriously helps us out a ton, as does just watching these videos, so thanks again. This is your Apple Sheep here, and I will see you all in the next one.